Hello again, my little goblins, and welcome to another Mordian Glory video. In today's episode, we shall be doing a tournament after action report. That's right, it's time for some more dispatches from the front lines. And oh boy, do I have a spicy meatball for your viewing pleasure today. Because for the first time ever, I took my Orc and Goblin army to a tournament. This is something I have looked forward to since I was a kid, since I was like 7 years old. And so, without further ado, I am truly really excited for this one. Let's form shield wall and charge right into this thing. As is tradition, I want to start off with a few thank yous. Firstly, I want to say a big thank you to Element Games, who were the venue and tournament organisers for this event. Over the years, I must have been to at least 100 events at Element Games, and I've even run a few there myself, and it's always been fantastic. The event staff are always really friendly and helpful, and the events themselves are always really well organised and run. I also want to do a shout out to all of my opponents this tournament. As I always say, Warhammer is a social game, and it very much comes down to the people on the other side of the table to make or break an event. And I can say confidently that I had 3 fantastic games. Last but certainly not least, I want to do a big shout out to my mate Sam, who was a lifesaver and at the last minute was able to give me a lift to the tournament where Mrs. Mordian had to steal my car when hers broke. So Sam, also known as That Rat Bastard in the MG community, thank you so much for your help, mate. You were an absolute lifesaver. But with all of that said, now let's get into the video proper, and we'll begin with the list overview. As per usual, I have done a separate video, and I'll make sure there's a link to the video down in the description below, going through the nitty-gritty detail of the army list that I used. So if you want to go and check that out to get all of the fine details, then of course you can do that. But for those of you that just want a quick high-level summary, this is what was in my list for the tournament. For my characters, I had a Black Orc War Boss with full plate armor, trollhide trousers, the choppiest chopper, and enchanted shield. I also had an Orc Weird Boy, so level 2 with the Ruby Ring of Ruin and Battle Magic. I actually never used the Ruby Ring. I either forgot that I had it or my Orc Weird Boy was in combat. So that was a bit of a useless upgrade. I should have put that on the Night Goblin. The idea with the Orc Weird Boy is that he was going to lead the big guns and then he would just cast Hammer Hand every turn and just give them a bit of magical punch. And that actually worked out really well. I really like that combo. Speaking of other mages, we've got Night Goblin Oddnob, level 4, Wild Magic, no lore familiar here. I was just embracing the Orc craziness and rolling for all my spells. And then we had a Night Goblin Big Boss, who was my Battle Standard Bearer with Troll, High Trousers, and Enchanted Shield. The idea with this is that I've learned with my Empire that if you're running like an infantry-heavy army, as mine is, you kind of need to have the BSB because there's going to be a few times when you take a bad charge. You need to be able to stick around, and then you can start winning the combat in the long run. So that's why we've got the BSB. Also, I just, in principle, like taking BSBs. I think they're a really cool part of Warhammer Old World. As for my core units, I had 19 Black Orcs with full plate armor. I paid for them to have stubborn, and I had the boss, the standard bearer, and the musician. I gave half of them double hand weapon and half of them the great weapons. The reason I went for double hand weapon over something like hand weapon shields is because that's what they were modeled with. But to be honest, it would have been so much better if I had hand weapon and shield and had that 3-up armor save most of the time. Oh, it would have made such a difference. So lesson learned with that one. We then had 19 Orc Big Guns with double hand weapon, full command. We had 31 Night Goblins with short bows and the Spider Banner and the 3 Fanatics. I don't own 90 Night Goblins. That's why I wasn't doing the full Death Star, the full Dragon Slaying Death Star, as it were. But also, I don't really like that kind of cheese. I'm coming from 40k. I'm playing Old World to get away from cheese, not to be the cheese. And then I had a Squig Herd consisting of 12 Squigs and 7 Herders. And then we had 10 Night Goblin Wolf Riders, fully upgraded with spears, shields, and all that good stuff. And then we had a Goblin Mob with, again, Nasty Skulkers and all the upgrades there. Finally, we rounded the list out with 4 trolls, and that was the list. For those of you who are curious about the list builder I'm using here, it's called Old World Builder. I just type Old World Builder into Google and it always comes up. I really like this army list builder. It's very, very good, and I use it for all of my Old World lists. This isn't a sponsored video. I just like to promote tools that I think are useful to gamers, to war gamers, and this is one that I really like and I highly recommend. But with all of that said, now let's get into the lay of the land. How competitive was this event? What was the format? This was a 1-day, 3-round classic Warhammer tournament. The table sizes were 60 by 44, so a bit smaller than the usual 6 by 4 boards. And also, we were playing with essentially player-placed terrain. To be honest, it wasn't completely clear how the terrain was meant to be used. Most people just turned up to a table and left it how it was, unless it seemed like it had been nudged by people in between rounds, at which point it was kind of put back into sort of intuitive places. But it wasn't any sort of standardized or set terrain. The only time that we had a set piece terrain was when we were doing the Command and Control Lonely Tower mission. But how sharky or competitive was this thing? Overall, I would describe it as regular competitive. There was a small cohort of people that had turned up with very filthy lists. We're talking Vampire Count Scream lists, we're talking Tomb Kings, the Million Poison Arrows, that kind of stuff. But the vast majority of players were in that sort of middle bracket. People who had a few games of Old World under the belt, might have been to a tournament or two before, but were just using what either they enjoyed or what was as powerful as they could build within the limits of their current collection. And there was also a small cadre of people who were coming to their first tournament and were just happy to be there, kind of stuff. So it's a real mixture, and overall I would say it balanced out to a nice level of skill, very friendly opponents, and a regular competitive environment. Now that covers all of the pre-games preamble, if you will, but I know why you're really here. I know what you really want. You know what? It's time to get into the games. Round number 1, I find myself paired into the Disgraced Flower of Bretonnia because I was playing against Bretonnian Exiles. My opponent described his army as a Bretonnian gunline, and I actually thought that was really cool and definitely a bit of a different dynamic to other Bretonnian lists that I've faced. And it definitely is quite a powerful way to play because he's got just enough firepower where he can force most armies to come to him, but then he's got loads of knights which are going to be really good at like countercharging. This was like a really big problem for me as a mostly infantry based army because I'm going to be marching up the board and then he's just going to charge me. So it's kind of cool, but I really, really like the way this army was put together. Also, shout out to my opponent's color scheme. I thought it was really good. The scenario for the first mission was pitched battle. We're just going to run at each other and smash each other. As for the terrain, you can see that there are 4 pieces of it. We have got 2 forests and 2 hills. All of the terrain was pretty centrally located, which goes against a lot of what happens normally in Old World, but I actually really liked it. It meant that there were some distinct lanes on the battlefield. Like this part of the battlefield was like its own little separate battle. Likewise, so is the middle and so is the left. And so what ended up happening throughout the game, as you'll see, is it essentially devolved into 3 micro battles within the main battle, the left flank, the middle, and the right flank. For my deployment, I thought it would be kind of cool to deploy my armies in their different tribes. So there wasn't any real tactical thought put in here, but I was like, you know what? The common goblins can go on the left. The orcs and the trolls, like the big things, can go in the middle. And then the night goblin tribes can hold the right flank. My thinking was that this army, like so many orc goblin armies, consists of multiple tribes that have essentially been beaten into line by the war boss's tribe, the strongest tribe. And so he obviously is going to take the central position because that's where all the serious fighting was going to be. And he was going to stick the goblins on the flanks where they could at least slow the enemy down. That was literally my entire thought process with deployment. I was going full vibes. I wasn't too worried about winning or losing. I just thought that was kind of a cool way to deploy. My opponent definitely put a little bit more thought into his deployment. Over on the right flank, we had a unit of Pegasus Knights, a lone wolf character who's got like a big axe. I think it's like the huntsman's axe. That's really, it gets you lots of extra attacks. That was kind of cool. And then we had a lance of Knights of the Realm, Bombard, level 4 wizard with brigands with crossbows, a unit of Yeoman Guard, and a big, I think it's either a Duke or a Baron. I think it's the second level one, so not quite the full level one, but the second level Lord on Pegasus with the monster slaying general loadout. You guys know what this Bretonnian Lord does. Every Bretonnian army runs him. And then we've got a unit of Peasants with bows, another unit of Peasants with bows, a Bombard, and we've got another unit of Knights of the Realm. For your viewing pleasure, I've got some close-ups of the units on both sides and at the deployment. So we've got the Common Goblins on the left flank, we've got the Black Orcs in the middle and the Trolls in the middle, we've got the Orcs in the middle, and we've got the Night Goblins on the right flank. Then we've got the Bretonnians on the Orc and Goblin right flank, Bretonnians in the middle, and Bretonnians on the Orc and Goblin left flank. And then we get to the first overview picture. So I just want to apologize and say I didn't get an overview picture of turn 1. So this is the state of the game at the end of turn 2. The Bretonnian Exiles actually won the roll-off because they don't have to pray for the blessing of the lady. They do actually get to roll off, which is actually quite a big deal if they do get to go first. And my opponent did manage to go first. His first turn, he essentially staged his Knights of the Realm on the left, staged his Knights of the Realm and Peg Knights on the right, and then fired all of his guns into my Black Orcs and killed one. And I was thinking, not much of a gun line this. It did end up picking up a lot of steam later on. For my turn 1, my Night Goblins kind of dropped the ball. I fired all of their poison shots into the Pegasus Knights. I just didn't roll any poison. I rolled like 3 5s and then just didn't wound. Poison bows, fishing for 6s. I don't rate it. I think if you've got 90 of them, it's great. But I think I always don't like fishing for 6s. I think it's an unreliable strategy. So there we go. As for the middle of the board, I just was marching forward with my Black Orcs and my Trolls. And then my Common Goblins marched up to here. But my Wolf Riders actually went for a turn 1 charge on the Knights of the Realm on that left flank. And they got it. Now, they passed their Impetuous check. I chose to do that charge because I thought it'd be funny. I thought, what would the Wolf Riders do? They'd go out there and they'd be all excited that they were in combat and they were riding their big wolves and everything. They would go for it. They would go for it, right? So I went for the charge. Now, despite the fact that my opponent got to counter charge, he only counter charged 2 inches. So that meant his total initiative was 5 and my initiative was 6. Because I made like a huge, it's like a 16-inch charge and I made it. It was brilliant. My Wolf Riders killed 4 Knights of the Realm. I was very lucky. I only dropped like 1 hit from the 6 attacks from the cavalry spears because I've got a boss in there, a sergeant. So I have, even though there's only 5 on the front rank, I've got 6 attacks. And I only dropped like 1 hit from the wolves as well. And I'm hitting on 4s. And then my opponent, I made a whole bunch of wounds. And my opponent just failed a whole bunch of saves. And I broke the knights and I ran them down. Common Goblins out cavalrying Bretonnians. I guess we now know why they were exiled. Now, that was actually a really big deal because it kind of broke open this left flank and it definitely got my opponent sweating a little bit. Unfortunately, the charge of the Light Brigade ended in rather typical fashion when my Bretonnian opponent rolled a big 10 on the grape shot from his cannon. And there were like 2 Wolf Riders left. And then the 5 bowmen here were easily able to finish off the final 2 Wolf Riders. So they charged forward, smashed the knights, ran down the fleeing ones, and then just got completely slotted by guns. This is why the Empire prefers guns. I'm just saying, this is why I'm an Empire player. As for the middle, the Bretonnians did a bit more firepower with the bows and the crossbows and the bombard into my Black Orcs and were able to kill a few more of them. And then the Green Knight appeared behind the trolls. I kind of forgot he could do that. He charged into them and he was able to break them, but he didn't catch them. Finally, Bretonnian turn 2 on the right flank. They broke through. So I'm breaking through on the left flank, they're breaking through on the right flank. So the Pegasus Knights and the Huntsman Lady charged into my squigs. This is one of the problems of being on a smaller board. My squigs were deployed in like a 5x4 formation. But if I'd been on the wider 6x4 board, which I had thought that this tournament was going to be on, they would have been deployed with all 12 squigs on the front. What's interesting is I lost about 6 squigs. So I would have had 6 squigs back. And that's 12 attacks. Now, sure, I'm only hitting on 4s because weapon skill 4 versus weapon skill 4. But I'm strength 5 on squigs, so I'm wounding on 2s. And I've got decent AP as well. There's a real chance that I could have killed Pegasus Knight or 2. I could have done a number of wounds. But because of the fact that the board was smaller and I couldn't deploy my units as wide as I wanted to, I meant I didn't have as many poison bow shots as I wanted, and it also meant that I didn't have as many squig attacks as I wanted. On top of this, I also misunderstood how fanatics worked in this game. I thought I had to release them in my turn. That was just a total brain fart on my side, and I actually wanted to release the fanatics here. So a combination of me messing with my fanatics rules this game, and then also the board being a bit smaller, definitely led to this Bretonnian breakthrough. But I was actually pretty confident that I was going to be able to rectify the situation, because now that my opponent's here, I can actually push my fanatics out and I can start hitting them with him, guaranteed. And so in my turn 2, what happens is I push all 3 fanatics out. I get 2 that come out the back and then they go this way. So they're able to hit the lady and they're able to hit the Pegasus Knights. And then I've got one that is able to come out the front here and hit the Pegasus Knights as well. Now, I've always said that I thought fanatics were too swingy. And I think they're more of a psychological weapon than anything else. This game proved it in my eyes. I'm sorry, I know a lot of people say fanatics are great, but I'm not convinced. So the first one rolled a double and killed himself. Lol. The second one went through both units and got 1 hit on each unit. Rolled a 1 and a 1. The third one went through both units and got a 5 and like a 5 or 6. So I did like loads. I was like, sweet. That's like 6 attacks, 6 wounds on her. This is like 6, 7 wounds on these guys. It's going to be amazing. So strength 5 and stuff is 4. I do like 4 wounds here. And then same, I do about sort of 4 or 5 wounds here. And I'm like, sweet, I'm going to like smash this like AP3. I'm going to smash these guys. Well, the Bretonnians got like a 2+ save. So that goes down to a 5-up save and a 5-up ward. So between those two, as Bretonnians are wont to do, that's like 1 save. Because it's a 5-up save and a 5-up ward. It always happens. And then the Pegasus Knights roll their like 4 or 5 saves. And I only do 1 wound to them because they just make their armor saves and they've got the blessing of the lady now because they've defeated the squigs. And so I'm just like, damn you, 5-up, 5-ups, damn you to Hades. I mean, I guess the Pegasus one's 6 at 5-ups. But my opponent just rolled really lucky on the 5-ups. I can't get mad though, because these guys had literally just regained the blessing of the lady. Clearly, the lady's favor was still upon them. Her gaze was still on this unit. However, it did mean that this flank was now completely cooked. This was gone. This was gone now. This is just a case of how long it's going to take the Bretonnians to mop all this up, right? Because they're going to hit me on the flanks. It's going to be gnarly. It goes from bad to worse on the right flank when I have a 9-inch charge on these Bretonnian Knights of the Realm, and on 4 dice, because I've got warband, so I rolled 2, pick the highest, and then try again to pick the highest. 4 attempts to roll a 5, I don't manage it. If I'd got that charge on the flank, it probably would have turned this flank around, but I failed it. So yeah, the right flank's completely balked it. And then in the center, the Black Orcs just keep marching on up, but the Trolls fail to rally and they flee through the Bretonnian peasants. They eventually end up fleeing off the board when this Pegasus guy charges them. I think he actually, they flee away from him and they just flee off the board. That happens turn 3. We'll get to that in a bit. The right flank, the Goblins just march up. So turn 2 was pretty disastrous for me. I'm not going to lie. My right flank completely fails. My Trolls completely drop the ball. And my Black Orcs are just marching into the teeth of these guns. And now they're going to get probably grape-shotted by 2 cannons and all this stuff. It's going gnarly, I'm not going to lie. And truthfully, things just went from bad to worse in turn 3. Knights of the Realm and the Green Knight charge into the Orc big guns here. And they easily cut down the front rank of like 5 guys. I actually I fully break, but I flee the full 12 inches, and I'm very lucky they don't catch me. And I'm able to reform into a wider line when I rally in my turn 3, just trying to hold the charge off because I know it's going to be coming in turn 4. Basically the same thing happens with my Goblins here. I'm very lucky though, because the Pegasus Knights and the Huntsman Lady, they sort of break the Goblins, and then the Goblins bounce through the fleeing Orcs. But the Orcs obviously ignore Goblin, panic, although they're already fleeing, so we just said they just sort of go through. And then but these guys weren't able to get the distance to overrun into the side of my, at the time, currently fleeing Orcs. I think they might have killed them if they'd managed to make contact. My turn 3 on this flank essentially consists of rallying here and rallying here. And I was fortunate I actually managed to rally both of them. And I rallied the Orcs into a wider formation so I'd be able to get a more defensive, line-hammery kind of posture. Although I know it's a futile effort because they're going to get hit by 4 units now, and it's going to be bad. As for the center, Bretonnian turn 3, they just double grape shot all of the crossbows, all of the bows into my Black Orcs and really whittle them down. I am able to, in my turn 3, charge my Black Orcs into the Yeoman Guard, and I start absolutely butchering them, but they have got shield, wall, and they've also got the thing that makes them stubborn, and so they actually just give ground. And this is why at the beginning of Bretonnian turn 4, remember this picture taken at the beginning of turn 4, you can see that the Bretonnians have basically flank charged me with everything just to try and finish off the Orcs and maybe save the Yeoman Guard. But that's turn 4, so we'll get to that in a bit. We've then got what happened with the Goblins and the Trolls. The Duke charged the Trolls, who just fled off the board, and the Goblins charged the Bowmen and the Cannon and were able to beat them, and I was able to test to restrain, and I reformed facing this way. So left flank is doing well. Right flank is goners. Middle is... I'm very, very heavily outnumbered, although my Orcs are really going to work. I was very impressed with how well the Black Orcs were doing. As we get into the latter part of this game, the second half, it becomes really obvious that the Bretonnians are going to win. But me and my opponent are having such a blast that we want to play it through. But I'll just take you through essentially the highlights of what happened in the second half of the game. So the Orc Bukkake party goes exactly how you would expect it to. They break, the few survivors flee off the board, and the Goblins break from the Orcs breaking. They panic and they flee off the board. Over in the middle, what essentially happens is my Black Orc war boss just is like the lone survivor. He just hacks through all of the Yeoman Guards single-handedly, and he then actually ends up going on a bit of a killing spree, and he ends up killing, he sort of breaks through on my opponents, I think like turn 5, so when it comes up to my turn 5, he's then able to like actually like start doing some charging and stuff, which is kind of cool, and he charges down these like these brigands here and just hacks them to pieces. The Shoppy's Chopper, and they break and they flee off the board, which is really cool. And the best bit and the Black Orc Wolf actually survives the end of the game. He survived the whole game, because I think my Bretonnian opponent tries to shoot him with a cannonball, and he just fucking tanks it on his trollhide trousers like an absolute boss. As for the common goblins, they also survive the game. What happens is my common goblins like evilly glare at the Bretonnian Duke, and they take like 3 wounds off him. And he only has like 1 wound left. I'm not sure how many he starts with, but he only had like 1 wound left. And then he charged into my common goblins, and the nasty skulkers appear, and they've got fights first. And the nasty skulkers appear with their 6 attacks and go, "Nya!" And they shiv him. and they shiv him. So whoever says nasty skulkers aren't worth it, I'm just saying. All you need is to get very lucky on that armor bane 6 to wound, and I'm able to shiv the Bretonnian Duke. And but that's basically all she wrote for the common goblins. They end up just chilling out here for the rest of the game because they can't get after the Bretonnian peasants, because if they try and charge them, they're just going to flee. And then the knights, in sort of around sort of turn 5, turn 6, they're going to be in a position to sort of start countercharging the common goblins. So end of the game ended with the Black Oak War Boss standing atop a pile of about 25 Bretonnian peasants, which he'd almost single-handedly slaughtered himself, and ended with my common goblins looting the corpse of a Bretonnian noble on Pegasus, but everyone else died. But it wasn't actually, the game wasn't actually too far apart. I think I ended up scoring about 800 points. My opponent ended up scoring about 1,400 points, which sounds crazy, but you've got to kind of remember there's like a level 4 wizard in here. And also my Black Oak War Boss is here, and he's like 200 points. Level 4 is like 200 points. And then like the common goblins are like a 200 point unit. So there's about 600 points of my army left over, which is why my opponent ends up getting about 1,400. And as for my opponent, I have killed the big Duke, who's like 400 points. I've actually killed plenty of things by the end of the game. It was just not quite enough. And so game 1 does end in a loss, technically a loss for the Orcs and Goblins. But as we all know, Orcs and Goblins are never beat. But on a more serious note, I went into this tournament with absolutely zero expectations of winning any games, because I was just using the models basically that I'd restored from my childhood army, and I was just here to embrace the vibes and have fun. And this was a fantastic start to the tournament because my opponent was an absolute gent. There were no rules problems whatsoever. I got a few rules wrong. He got a few rules wrong, but we picked up on them. We helped each other through the game. And overall, it was just a ton of fun and peak sportsmanship. And this game was what Old World is all about for me. Yeah, my opponent had a stronger list. I didn't begrudge him for that. He had come with a strong list. I'd come with a meme list. We both walked away from that game with exactly what we wanted. So in game number 2, I am paired into the Empire. So we faced the wannabe Empire with Bretonnian Exiles game 1. Now we're facing the true Empire of Man in game 2. My opponent had a really cool army. It was all knights and magic with a bit of firepower. So he had 3 big bricks of knights. These ones over here were in a circle. The rest of them were regular knights. And he wasn't running it in one of the new knightly orders. He was just running it in a normal grand army, and that was because he wanted 3 level 4 wizards. Oh my god. 3 level 4 wizards. And they were all about shooting magic missiles and vortexes. One of them had like this mad thing that let it cast the same spell twice. It was like double fireball, like akimbo fireballs in the hands. There was a lot of magical firepower. I think it was the most magical firepower I've ever been on the receiving end of. He also had a steam tank. He also had 2 cannons. The mission for the second game was meeting engagement. That's where you deploy diagonally, and you can deploy up to a minimum of 12 inches away if you want to. And but you have to roll a 1. The mission for game number 2 was meeting engagement. This is where you have to roll a dice for each one of your units before the game starts. And if you roll a 1, then your unit doesn't turn up at the beginning of the game. It has to walk on later, like from turn 2 onwards, that it walks on your respective board edge. So either this board edge or this board edge down here, depending on which side you're on. Now, my opponent and I had a gentleman's agreement, which was if you have a character that's going to be joining a unit, you roll the 1 dice. Because there's nothing worse in meeting engagement than having a unit that kind of relies on having a character or thematically has a character, and then the character rolls a 1 and the unit turns up, or vice versa. It just kind of it ruins it. It spoils it. There's a reason why meeting engagement isn't normally used at tournaments. So my opponent and I, as we both lost our first game, as neither one of us was going to be in a position to podium or win anything at this event, we agreed to have a gentleman's agreement where if you've got characters that want to start in units, they can do. There's no problem whatsoever. Now, in terms of units that didn't turn up, for me, it was just my big blob of common goblins. For my opponent, it was 1 cannon and 1 of his level 4 wizards, because he did originally think about having all of his wizards inside the night buses, but then he decided last minute to have his wizards actually as separate units. With all that said, let's get into deployment for this game. And it kind of highlights one of the big issues I have with meeting engagement, which is because it's on a diagonal board, it actually makes the deployment quite cramped. And this is doubly so when you're playing on a 60 by 44. Because you could deploy all the way up to here. Remember, of course you could. But if you get pushed back 1 inch, the unit breaks off the board. Because if you can fall back in good order off the board, you can give ground off the board as well. So as a result of this, I ended up deploying in 2 lines. I had my goblins up front and my orcs behind. Now, the reason I did this is because even though my orcs are the more combat units, and so ideally they want to be first into the fray, I don't mind if my opponent charges my goblins with all of his knights. Because firstly, that will get rid of his first charge bonus. I don't care if he runs down a bunch of goblins, and it means that my orcs then will be able to have their rank bonuses and stuff. And secondly, even if all of these gobbos break and flee through my orcs, I ignore goblin panic. And I'm kind of okay if he wants to charge some knights in and break the goblins and then overrun of the black orcs. Because I think that black orcs beat Empire Knights. Overall, I think they do that. By the way, you may wonder why my opponent's deployed in these long columns here. He has drilled on every single one of these units. As is becoming tradition at this point, I do have some close-ups of the deployment for your viewing pleasure. So we've got a bit of a close-up of the Orc and Goblin one there. Got a bit of a close-up of the Empire one there. And then we get into turn number 1. So with everything down, me and my opponent roll off for first turn, and the Empire managed to get the initiative. At the beginning of my opponent's start of turn subphase, I actually push out the Fanatics because I don't really want him to come in here with these knights unless I can sort of set up a nice sort of counter charge or flank kind of situation. And also it just creates a bit of a dilemma for my opponents. Like if he wants to charge knights in and charge a bunch of fanatics, he can do that, but it's definitely going to be an unpleasant experience for him. Then we go on to turn 1 for the Empire proper, and they bring the steam tank forward, and they don't move anything else, which I was pretty surprised by. I thought that maybe my fanatics had psychologically frightened my opponent staying back. But as you'll see a little bit later on, my opponent probably wasn't ever actually going to charge me with these knights. It was all part of his cunning strategy. As for the rest of the Empire turn, it starts off with my fanatics moving. First one rolls a double 6, which at first I think is really good because I'm like, yes, I can make it to these knights and smash into them. But then I remember that it doesn't matter if it's a double 6, it's still a double, so the fanatic throttles himself. And unfortunately he died. The second one managed to bounce through the steam tank and was able to do a wound to it. And then the third one sort of just went up to about here and didn't do anything. My opponent didn't do any charges, so there was no combat in his turn, so there was just a lot of shooting. And he unleashed a whole magical firestorm. It was very, very impressive. And if you can see, this was a full unit of like 30 plus goblins. After my opponent had done all of his magic missiles, I was down to just this handful of survivors. And they only stuck around because the BSB was in the Black Orc unit, and the War Boss was here, and so they were able to pass the leadership. But it was a very, very strong display of magic. We then go over to Orc and Goblin turn 1. My Fanatic that had bounced through the steam tank the first time ended up rolling a double and dying. And then the second Fanatic went in a random direction. He went through the steam tank. I was able to do a couple of wounds to it. So you see he's bounced through over here. I bring my squigs up to here, getting ready to do some sort of crazy flanking shenanigans. Yes, I'm in the forest, so I will be rolling 2d6, picking the lowest, but it's fine because I'm pretty close to that steam tank. Trolls fail their stupidity test, and so they just stumble forward a smidge. And my Wolf Riders failed their impetuous test and charged into the flank of the Inner Circle Knights. Now, I presumed that because they had beaten the Bretonnian Knights, they would have no problem with dealing with the Inner Circle Knights. Here's the thing. Inner Circle Knights have got full plate armor. So they're on a 2+ save. So I actually end up rolling pretty well on my attacks again. And I ended up doing like 4 or 5 wounds again. I was in a big line this time, so to be fair, I had more attacks. But I ended up doing like 4, I think it was actually 5 or 6 AP1 wounds. And my opponent rolls the saves, and he rolls like 3 or 4 threes, and I'm like, oh my god, I've done it again. And he goes, no, I'm on a 3-up save. I'm like, what do you mean you're on a 3-up save? He went, I've got full plate. And I was like, oh, of course, they're the Inner Circle ones. So I would have actually done it again, but unfortunately the full plate got me. In return, the Knights turn around and are able to kill 3 of my Wolf Riders who break, and these Knights actually failed their test to restrain. And they come down here, but they don't quite manage to catch me. But it doesn't really matter because he's going into his turn next, so he'll be able to catch those if he really wants to. Going into turn 2, we have an end of summary picture here for the Empire turn. So this is just the Empire turn. And rather predictably, the Knights chase down the Wolf Riders. I actually roll like a double 1 on my flee roll, but I'm actually okay with that because I didn't want to flee too far because I wanted to be at him to catch me, and then I was hoping that I'd then be able to get a charge in with the big guns. Now, what's kind of interesting here is my opponent, I thought, would have just chosen to like overrun, but he actually tested to restrain and then he reformed. I think that was a mistake because I think if he'd overrun, he could have got out of my charge arc, and then I would have been in deep doggy doo-doo. But he decided to test to restrain, so fair enough. And then what happened else is my opponent unleashed another magical firestorm, cannons, grape shot from the steam tank. You can now grape shot from the steam tank, which is a really, really big deal. That got updated in an FAQ recently. My opponent showed that FAQ, and let me tell you, that's making me very happy for my steam tank. So all of that firepower basically meant the rest of the Night Gobbos died, but not before the Fanatic here but randomly bounced through the steam tank, did another 3 wounds to it. That Fanatic did very, very well. And then bounced through the Knights here and was able to do kill like 3 or 4 of them as well before sort of you can just see this little ball poking out of the back here before he stopped at the back of the Empire there. So that Fanatic has done like 4 or 5 wounds to a steam tank and then killed like 3 or 4 of the Empire Knights as well. He's doing a good job. Big thing in my opponent's turn was that the Chaos Vortex went through the Black Orcs, didn't do anything to them, but then hit my lone level 4 wizard who's on top of this hill and killed him. So I'm now facing down 3 level 4s because my opponent's level 4 turned up. 3 level 4s, and I only have a level 2 in this unit here. I am severely outclassed in the arts. But where I may be outclassed in the arts, I am certainly inclassed in da choppers. So my turn 2, my common goblins turn up on this flank here. I then managed to get a flank charge because of where like the center of my unit was. I get a flank charge on the knights of the inner circle, and I march forward with my Black Orcs. No, so I tried to charge the Black Orcs into the steam tank again, needing a 5. Now I just can't make these 9-inch charges. Couldn't get him in the last game. Couldn't get this game. So the Black Orcs don't make it into the steam tank, but the squigs do, and I managed to bring the steam tank down to just 1 wound. I was very, very close. Almost managed to kill the steam tank, but not quite. But as for the combat with the big guns versus the inner circle knights, because I have charged, and because I am big guns, and because I have choppers and all these things like adding up, I actually I'm like AP -1, and I'm rerolling like ones to hit, ones to wound, sorry, and I actually killed like 4 of the inner circle knights, 5 of the inner circle. So I killed 3. There's 5 left, but I've hit my opponent in the flank. I've got a rank bonus. I've got a banner. My opponent doesn't kill any of my orcs back. I've like hammer-handed them as well, which I think I did manage to get that off. And so the knights actually break, and they full-blown break. My opponent rolls quite a high dice roll. And so what happens is my opponent flees away from the center of my unit, which was, you've got to imagine they were here. This is after I've reformed. They were here. Flees from the center of my unit, hits the goblins, flees through the goblins, and bounces off the board. Because he literally like flees here. This is basically, you can see here, this is like the edge of the board. So he hits here, lands here, and just flees off the board. So my cunning goblin orc combo definitely wasn't a complete accident. Managed to break and flee a unit of inner circle knights, and we've almost got the steam tank down as well. But it has been a bit of a brutal turn overall because we lost our level 4, and I'm now going to get charged by a bunch of knights over here. And here we have the end of turn 3. So this is the end of turn 3 for both the orcs and the empire. So my opponent's turn 3, he charges his knights in here into the squigs, and that's the only charge that he does. He then unleashes a whole magical firestorm and cannon firestorm into my orcs here. And as you can see, like I think I managed to like dispel one of them, but I am majorly outclassed here. And so my orcs are getting pretty badly hammered. My only saving grace is the fact that I'm toughness 4. So things like fireballs are now needing like 4s to wound me rather than 3s. And my opponent is, I have to admit, ironically, because it's all fire-based attacks, he's rolling a little coldly. And so he'll have like, let's say 7 hits from a fireball, wounding on 4s, he'll only get like 2. And the next time he'll only get like 3. And then I do have like a 6-up save, and I manage to like save one of them. So between a little bit of luck on my end, a little bit of cold dice on my opponent's end, my orcs do take a pounding, but they do manage to stick around. Then we get onto the charge from the knights. Now the knights kill the squigs, but they only kill like a few of them because I'm weapon skill 4 and he's weapon skill 4. So what happens is I've got about like 7 or 8, it might have been like 10 squigs left by the time out of like a 20-man strong unit. I think I lose like 10 models, but that's all like the herders and stuff. My opponent breaks the unit of squigs, but then that triggers squigs go wild, and I roll the dice, and I roll like, I think it was like a 9 on the dice. And what that means is that every unit within 9 inches gets hit by D3, because of the number of squigs, D3 plus 2, strength 5, AP -1, armor bane attacks. So I hit the knights, I hit the steam tank, and I kill the steam tank. So that's like 265 points killed by squigs gone wild. I do a little bit of damage to the Empire Knights, but the big one is I almost kill his level 4 here. If he didn't have Oaken Shield off on him, he would have died. But I do kill the level 4 that had come on the board here. And that was his general. And that was like, it must have been like a 400 point character. It had all of the gubbins on it. So Squigs Gone Wild got me about, I'd say, 700 points worth of victory points. 600 to 700 points, man. It was insane. And this was the moment when I truly fell in love with Orcs and Goblins. Because up until this point, there had been a number of shenanigans, a number of wacky things that had infatuated me towards the army, like the fanatics being... I hated the fact the fanatics were so swingy, but I loved it because it was so Orc and Goblin. Like, I was really enjoying, like, rolling for Impetuous. I looked forward to rolling it because it was funny when I failed it. And then just having, like, Squigs Go Wild and them just completely, like, just pick up, like, so many points. Honestly, this is when I knew I was home. This reminded me why I love this army so much as a kid. And that all happened in my opponent's turn 3. Because over to my turn 3, and I feel that the momentum has swung in my favor with that big Squid Goes Wild. So I'm able to, clearly my army had sensed it as well, because I finally passed the stupidity test on my trolls. They failed at the first 2 turns. They marched through the forest. It's got like a 6-inch move, so they marched like 12 inches. Obviously, it's 11 inches going through the forest, but still. And then my Black Orcs march through as well. My Orcs just move up, and then my level 2 gets a perfect invocation with his Fireball. Not even his Ruby Ring. Again, I forgot the Ruby Ring. Gets a perfect invocation with Fireball and manages to kill the cannon. I get 7 hits, and then I roll 3 6s to wound. And kill the cannon. And it's just like, we're on the warpath! Like, you can just feel the energy is going with the Orcs. The vibes are going with the Orcs. And so I didn't have any combat this turn, but I am advancing on the Empire Cavalry Corps with great confidence. Now, we're going to do the Empire turn 4, and I am expecting a cavalry charge from these knights. But I'm kind of okay with that because I suspect that my Black Orcs can beat these regular Empire Knights, even if they get the charge. What's also important to note is that my opponent has kind of screwed himself here because he can't drilled into a charge with these knights because of where the wizard is here and where the wizard is here. I think that if my opponent had his wizards a little bit further back or not in the way, doing a double knight charge would have allowed him to get these Black Orcs. But instead, what he does is he backs up. And I'm like, I said to my opponent, I thought you would have gone for the charge there. He's like, well, I don't think I win it. And also, I'm a shooting army. And I was like, what? He's like, yeah, this list is a shooting list. I'm like, what do you mean? You've got like 30 knights. He goes, yeah, the knights are just there to like countercharge if needed or if they think they can win it. But it's a shooting list because of the 3 level 4s and all of the magic and the cannons and the steam tank. And that's when it clicks into place. My opponent was never going to be charging me this entire game. I probably could have been a lot more aggressive with my deployment, had the Black Ops up the front and everything. But my opponent was always going to basically sit back and gunline me. So the knights are a bit of a red herring. And so I'm like, right, well, if you're not going to charge me, I'm going to charge you. Now my opponent, obviously that's in my turn in a moment. But for the rest of my opponent's turn 4, he basically puts all of his magic into the Orc unit here. And he does manage to kill them all. Despite some furious dispelling attempts from my level 2, it just wasn't enough. And those Orcs get blasted off the board. Turn 4 for the Orcs, and the Trolls manage to make the charge into the Knights, but the Black Orcs don't quite manage it, unfortunately. But they weren't within charge range, so I just marched them 8 inches forward. So my opponent, he can't get away from me now. The Trolls actually managed to hold against the Knights. I got pretty lucky with some regen saves. I don't hit a huge amount of times versus my opponent. I think I kill like 1 or 2 Knights. But my opponent has pretty bad luck and doesn't manage to do much to my Trolls either. To be fair, he's like hitting on 3s or 4s, but the problem is he's wounding on like 5, some toughness 4, he's strength 3 because he can't use his lances because I charged him. And then, you know, I've got like, I think it's a 5, I think I've got a 5 up save followed by 5 up regen because I'm river trolls, so I'm like a bit scalier. And I've got a good regen. So he struggles to hurt me, I struggle to hurt him, but the most important thing is that my trolls managed to basically tie the combat, which is perfect for me. All I need them to do now is basically hold on for another turn, and if they can do that, then I can charge my Black Orcs in and seal the deal. And this is the overview of the game at the end of turn 5. This is a combined Empire and Orc and Goblin turn. So the Empire magic goes, I've got no way to spell apart from my Fated, goes into the Black Orcs. And as you can see, they do strip off a good amount of the Black Orcs. But that is basically all that my opponent could do in his turn 5. He does take his knights and like thread the needle with like marching column all the way through like here to like here, which is really, really cool. Shows the power of a marching column of knights. So those knights do manage to like get away. But then in my turn 5, oh, and my trolls do hold his knights. My trolls manage to hold. It's a drawn combat. I think they do some wounds to me. I do some wounds to them. It's a full-blown drawn combat, which is amazing. That's all I needed. And then my Black Orcs charged in, and we just wipe out those knights there. The trolls overrun into the cannon, and the cannon flees. It panics and flees. The trolls overrun off the board, and the Black Orcs overrun into one of the level 4 wizards. It's just going very badly for my opponent. And at this point, there's pretty much nothing my opponent can do. I mean, just look at that Empire dead pile. I've pushed him back into his literal dead pile. And so with just one level 4, his engineer and a unit of knights left, we go into my opponent's turn 6. Now he takes his other level 4 and literally like marches him into the dead pile. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to catch. Like I couldn't make the charges there to catch him. Fair enough. So the only thing that really happens turn 6 is my opponent's charges his knights into my gobos who hold. I do lose a number of goblins, as you can see, but they do manage to stick around because they've got the boss's leadership there. They don't really do any damage to the knights back. My turn 6 consists of the trolls walking back on and us fighting another round against the knights. Once again, I don't really do very much to the knights. I might kill 1 or 2 of them. I might not kill any of them. But that is essentially the end of the game, with my goblins holding the knights in place for another turn. Did I manage to get one? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So yeah, over the course of my opponent's turn 6 combat, my turn 6 combat, my goblins lose about six blokes, 6 or 7 gobos. And in return, I'm able to kill 1 Knight of the Empire. And we get to the end. This is the final shot of the game with this really cool picture of the knights fighting against ranks of goblins. And it is a fairly convincing orc and goblin victory. I managed to, because I've still got my war boss, my BSB, my black orcs, my trolls, and my goblins left over. And my opponent, and that's a huge amount of points. My Black Orcs are like a 200, 300 point unit. My War Boss is like a 200 plus point character. My Trolls are like a 150 point unit. My Goblins like a 200 point unit. So I've got about 1,000 points left, and my opponent has got he's got like, I think he's got like about 600 points left over with the 1 unit of knights and basically the level 4. So it ends up being a bit of a reversal of last game, where I've managed to kill about 1,500 points of my opponent's army, and my opponent's managed to kill about 1,000 points of my army. So a bit of a reversal. Oh, and just in case you guys are wondering what happened with the nasty skulkers in this combat, they did absolutely nothing. So last time they killed a Bretonnian Duke on 1 wound with some lucky armor bane. This time they did nothing. I guess that is the nature of a 10-point upgrade. Sometimes it giveth, sometimes it does nothing. Now it is time for the final game. Game number 3. And I had a grudge match versus Sam. So Sam is a good mate of mine, that rat bastard. I've done many battle reports with him on the channel. And he also, like I said at the beginning of the video, gave me a lift to the event. And for the final round, Sam and I asked the TO if we could do a bit of a grudge match. Because, well, there's a bit of context here. Firstly, this was actually my 6th tournament game of the weekend. Because I've been at a tournament on the Saturday, which has been a one-day action tournament. And then this was a tournament I was on the Sunday of the weekend. And so this was like me doing a GT, like a 6-round, like major, as it were. So I was feeling knackered. But most importantly for me, I had a chat with Sam after I finished my game 2, and I was like, "Oh, how was your game?" He went, "Oh, I've been sat around for 2.5 hours." I went, "What? You had a buy?" He went, "No, my game was just over in 20 minutes. Like, we basically got to turn 2, and I was already dead." And I was like, "How were you already dead in turn 2?" And he went, "Well, I just faced off against the absolute meta cutthroat Bretonnian list, and my army is built around having 1,000 points in one blob of storm vermin, and getting a specific spell off. And my opponent had a list to shard in his list, so he just shut down all my magic and turn 1 or something, turn 1 or turn 2." My Praetorian opponent hit my 1,000+ point unit with like 3 of his best units, and they all died. And so end of turn 1 or turn 2, I had 2 units of clan rats left. It's like 1,000 points of characters in like a 500 point unit of storm vermin, and he was like, "Yeah." So that was it. I couldn't do anything. So I was like, "Well, you know what, mate? I'm feeling absolutely shad. You've had an absolute pisser of a second round. Do you want to end this tournament?" I said, "No harm if you don't. If you want to have a proper game 3, I don't mind. But do you want to end this tournament with a friendly game, and we can just basically do a grudge match, and we can have a casual one, because we know each other?" And Sam was like, had a little think about it, and was like, "You know what? That actually does sound like a great way to end the day." So we went over to the TO. And fortunately, I know the TO of Element really well. And we said, "Look, as long as it's no inconvenience to you, and it's not going to screw anyone out of any prizes or podium support, could we do this? But if there's any issue whatsoever, we'll just pair up normally. That's fine." And the TO said, "Give me 1 second." Looked at because he literally did. He was just about to announce the pairings, and he went, "I can literally swap 2 people around. You guys aren't going to impact anything if you want to do that." And I was like, "Amazing. Thank you so much." Big shout out to the Element TO for doing that. And so Sam and I were able to have a really fun game 3, Skaven versus Orcs and Goblins. So getting into the game now, the mission for round number 3 was the tower. That's where you get bonus points if you control the tower in the middle. And the terrain when we came across, it was all like just piled in the middle. It obviously just been pushed there after the round 2. So we just agreed to put a pretty standard layout of 1 hill in each person's deployment zone, 1 forest in each person's deployment zone. Job done. For my deployment, I decided to kind of mirror what I'd done in the first game and have my units broken down to tribes, my flanks broken down to tribes. So on the left, I had the common goblins and the trolls as well. I figured the trolls were pretty much go on any flank wherever they were needed. I put them behind the wolf riders because that way the wolf riders could go off and then the trolls could sort of be the actual sort of second line unit, as it were. And then in the middle, we had the orcs. And then on the right flank, we had the squigs. But this time, because of the way that I had deployed my units, especially things like the trolls, and I've been a bit more careful about how wide the boards were, I was actually able to get my squigs into the formation that they should have been in that first game. As for the Skaven, Sam went with the gutter runners up front here. He had a unit of clan rats with the rattling gun here, unit of clan rats with the rattling gun here, and the storm vermin were just behind this tower here, and you can see they've got their rattling gun as well. Now, Sam and I sort of agreed we were going to have like a chill game, basically sort of just run at each other. But then Sam sort of, took me through his list. Was like, "Well, this is like my big sort of death blob of storm vermin." And I was like, "Well, dude, like that's fine. If your list works in a certain way, please, have all the relevant characters in the blob and run it how it's meant to be run. But he said like, well, you know what? Like, it's round 3. I just want to have a chill one. Let's have a chill one. Let's just run at each other and just have a bit of fun on the Sunday afternoon, which is fair enough. So basically, what happened is we basically just lined up our forces and I'm like, we're gonna run at each other. But I did say to Sam that I would love to do a battle report where he gets to show off this tactic of having this absolute mega death blob, because I think that would be really cool for people to see. But what really stood out for me in this game is how little Skaven there are on the board. I don't want to wax lyrical about this too much because I have talked about it a few times before, like on live streams and in videos. But I really feel like Skaven is in such a bad spot at the moment as a faction. I mean, look at the line, the unbroken line of the Orcs and Goblins, and look at the isolated islands of Skaven. It's just such a shame. And yes, it's because basically there is 1,000 points of characters inside like a 500 point or something crazy unit of Storm Vermin. But I've got quite a few characters. I've got like a 200 point war boss, and I've got 4 characters. I must be spending like 600, 700 points on characters. But it just seems like Skaven are just so overpriced at every level. And so I really would love to see them get some points reductions or just something that allows them to feel like Skaven again. Maybe you bring back these Skaven Voluntolders. I don't know. But it just feels like there's something wrong with the faction at the moment. If I was to do a Skaven army, and I did chat about this with Sam, it's the last thing I want to say before we get into the game itself. If I was to do a Skaven army, I'd love to do like a proper horde, kind of like basically emulate this army I've got here, but with Skaven. And I was chatting to Sam about this on the way home, and he said you just can't get enough of what you want. Even if you go like really into like big hordes and like blocks of clan rats and everything, you just can't get what you want. So maybe the army is just fundamentally overcosted. I don't know, but this just seems like a pitifully small amount of Skaven for an army that is meant to be one of the quintessential iconic horde armies of the old world. And so I know there's a basically 0 chance of the old world team ever watching this video, but if you're at GW, if you're on the old world team, you're at SDS, screw the suits, screw the bigwigs, screw the executives. Don't listen to them and their legacy. Don't listen to their legacy rules and all that kind of nonsense. Just give Skaven, doesn't even need to be an army, but give Skaven a second look, give them a second pass, and make them the faction they were always meant to be. Make them a proper Skaven, because at the moment, this ain't working. Now, I'll climb down from my soapbox now and give you guys some close-up shots of the army. Just want to say big shout out to Sam. I love his Skaven paint scheme. It's really, really well done, like the swampy sewer bases and all that kind of stuff. And he's got the gutter runners here. We've got some more clan rats with the rattling gun. And then we've got the big blob of Storm Vermin over here with his big BSB. I think you get a good angle of the BSB from here. You can't quite see, it's got a really, really, really well done banner. Hopefully we'll get some pictures of that in game. And then we've got some close-ups of apparently some empty board. There's no purple orcs here. All right. So this is the state of the game at the end of Orc and Goblin turn 1. So let's get through that. So I did win the roll-off for the first turn, and I just went forward with everything. My turn 1 was very simple. Just one big line, mean and green, just going as far forward as I could. The only point of note for my turn 1 was the fact that my Wolf Riders over here failed their impetuous check and tried to charge the Gutter Runners, because they've got a really long charge distance. And the Gutter Runners actually were able to do a stand and shoot, and they killed 3 of the Wolf Riders on their stand and shoot. Sadly, my super shock cavalry Wolf Riders with their 5-up save, they didn't make any 5-ups that time. So a few casualties with some impetuous Wolf Riders, but I'm feeling confident that with just the pure overwhelming numbers that I have, I'm feeling kind of confident. Then we get into Skaven turn 1, and they actually get a turn 1 charge. They get about 4 turn 1 charges. So all of the Night Runners, all the Gutter Runners, I should say, charge into my Wolves. And then because they've got like Swift Stride and some other crazy stuff on the Stormvermin unit, they actually make a big long bomb charge. They get that Sam rolls like a fiend, rolls like 6s for days on everything, and he does actually manage to get into my Orc big guns here. He actually makes it into them. And there's a bit of firepower elsewhere from things like rattling guns and whatnot, but that was pretty much it. I think this rattling gun goes absolutely bonkers and does manage to like scythe down a troll and also do 2 wounds to another one. So that rattling gun went absolutely ham, did a great job. I think it got like the big 20 shots. It did very, very well. And then it came down to combat. And amazingly, no word of a lie, my Wolf Riders beat 3 squads of Night Runners. Gutter Runners. They're not Night Runners. Night Runners, it would be understandable. Gutter Runners. These are like a rare or like a special choice. These are like the elite of the elite. These are the best that Clan Eshin has to offer. And they just rolled terribly. They just rolled terribly. I like to think that what actually happened is in classic Skaven fashion, Clan Eshin said that they had sent Gutter Runners, but actually what they'd said is a bunch of Skaven voluntolders and just dressed them up in black clothes. And they'd taken the money, they'd taken the Warp Zone tokens. So they went in and they just rolled terribly. Like, not every single one of them could strike. As you can see, they were sort of in 3 managed to get onto the front rank of each squad. But still, that's like nine guys, like 18 attacks, and they killed like 3 guys. And I was like, okay, well, I've got 5 wolf attacks back, and I've got 5 gobbo attacks back, so I guess I'll strike back. And I'm at sorry, 4 wolf attacks, yeah. So 9 attacks in total, it was like the Bretonnian game all over again. It was like, apparently my night goblins, my common goblins believe that it's like in ancient times that Alexander the Great, the left is the position of honor, and so the companion wolf riders, and they managed to kill 4 of the gutter runners. So I lost 3, they lost 4, and Skaven aren't particularly brave, so they all sort of flee and fall back in good order and all sorts of other, just like completely break apart. Madness. And this one flees but doesn't, this one falls back in good order but doesn't fall back too far. And then I follow up into him. Crazy. Honestly, these Wolf Riders consistently performed way better than they ever had any right to do so. I'm just calling it now. Wolf Rider meta incoming. Maybe not. Maybe if you're very good at rolling dice and your opponent rolls badly, maybe. But it wasn't all going the way of the Orcs Goblins. The Storm Vermin absolutely battered the big guns. And I fell back in good order, significant distance. I was able to reform my ranks a little bit after the fallback. But that was basically it, and they overran into my squigs because they're quite wide. Just the way the unit was, they probably could have overrun into here and broken through. That would have been quite good. But the squigs managed to they basically made accidental contact with them. We get into Orc Goblin turn 2, and it is crunch time. The big uns, after gathering their wits, charge back into the combat with the Storm Vermin, coming to help out the Squiggy boys, and my Wolf Riders are stuck in combat with their one Gutter Runner. My Black Orcs charge the other unit of Gutter Runners, which flee, and then I've got the unit of Trolls, which go absolutely bonkers. I also charge a unit of Gutter Runners with these Night Goblins. These Common Goblins, they also flee, and the Trolls charge into the Clan Rats that were here, absolutely crush them, break them, they flee off the board, they bounce, because they basically what happens is they roll like a 6/6 on the flee, and they bounce through the gutter runners that had fled from the night goblins, and they flee off the board, and the trolls are overrun into the gutter runners. Just, I was like, these gutter runners are single-handedly causing the collapse of the entire Skaven army. They can't beat a handful of common goblins on Wolfback, and they're causing whole units of clan rats to basically bounce off through them off the board. It's just, you couldn't make it up. It's classic Skaven chicanery, Skaven shenanigans coming back to bite them in the ass. Elsewhere, the Wolf Riders kill their gutter run and overrun into the next unit there. And then we've got the combat between the big uns, the squigs, and the storm vermin, which starts swinging heavily in the favour of the orcs and goblins because of the squigs. Squigs are so good. 2 attacks apiece, strength 5. Obviously, only 3 of these can actually make 2 attacks, but the remaining 7 can still do supporting attacks. So that's still like 6, that's still like 13 attacks. And once I've got my hits through, I'm just wounding no problems, because I'm like strength 5 or something bonkers. I'm wounding no problems whatsoever. So yeah, the storm vermin start getting mown down. To be fair, though, they are taking a lot of orc big guns with them. And one thing I just want to say is that if this had been a straight up fight between the big guns and the storm vermin, there's no doubt in my mind that the storm vermin would have handily won it. Handily. And so I know it's easy to look at some of these Skaven units that are kind of crumbling before the green tide. And you can see the clan rats getting battered by trolls. You can see the gutter runners just flailing in front of the wolf riders. But the Skaven does have a couple of good units, and I really, really rate storm vermin. They're very, very expensive for Skaven. They're 10 points a pop. But they are one of the few units that were just in this army that were able to go toe to toe with their equivalent, which I think big guns are pretty equivalent to them. If you take into account like all the points costs and and all that kind of stuff, they're pretty equivalent. You only get 1 unit of big guns in like your whole army, and so the storm vermin handily beat them. And in any one-on-one matchup, whether it was the squigs or the big guns, the storm vermin would have easily beaten it. And going against both, they're on the losing end of the combat in the long run, but they're going toe-to-toe with 2 units. So outnumbered 2-1, basically taking on 2 special units themselves. Because I still think that squigs are pretty special. It's mad that they're like a core unit. They should be a special unit. But 2, what I see as like special units, go versus 1, and the storm vermin are able to hold the line. They're really solid storm vermin. I really rate them. So this picture was taken at the end of Skaven turn 2, and I've just done one thing in my turn 3. I'll just point that out now to avoid any confusion. These goblins had charged this rattling gun, but that's not relevant for what we're going to talk about for the Skaven turn 2. So what happens in Skaven turn 2 is the rattling gun scythe down a bunch of the goblins here. And I think you can see they killed about 5 of them, which is not too bad. And then the clan rats actually charged into the black orcs. The reason they did that is because the black orcs got furious charge. If the clan rats could charge in first, then they sort of negate me getting that bonus attack. And then we get to the combats. The clan rats actually do okay versus the black orcs. Like, they lose 4 of their own, but I mean, I don't exactly smash them back. A big reason for that is because my war boss is placed here, so he's not getting all of his attacks anyway. And he's in a challenge with a Skaven chieftain. And what's kind of funny is my war boss actually only does 1 wound to the Skaven chieftain. He should have absolutely bodied him, but I rolled a bunch of like 1s and 2s to hit. So he didn't. But yeah, so I think he was just playing with his food, to be honest. As for the rest of the term, the big gun squig grind continues. You can see the big guns are getting very thin now. Very thin, but so are the storm vermin. Honestly, the squigs were the champions of this little micro battle. If it hadn't been for the squigs, I think the big guns would have lost easy peasy. And then we have the fight between the wolf riders and the gutter runners, where, again, amazingly, the wolf riders are actually able to win the fight. Now, they did have the advantage of going first because of the overrun. So they were initiative 6 versus the Gutter Runners initiative 5. And so we managed to kill 2 of the Gutter Runners. And the Gutter Runners killed 1 of us back. But that meant that we were able to then win the combat. And they gave ground. And I followed up. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures apart from this one of round 3. And round 3 did end up being the final round of the game because it was pretty much over at that point. But I've got this picture up on screen because it was a really, really epic moment. Before we get to that, I'll tell you essentially what happened in turn 3. So the trolls that had overrun into the Gutter Runners killed them and basically overran off the board. The goblins had charged the rattling gun and killed that. The storm vermin finally broke under the snapping jaws of the squigs and were destroyed. And the Black Orc boss killed the chieftain, and the Black Orcs found their stride and basically killed the clan rats. And they broke. They didn't flee very far, unfortunately, and the Black Orcs essentially chased them down. But the main event was the Wolf Riders versus the second unit of Gutter Runners. So because last time they had given ground, it meant, and the goblins had followed up, it actually meant that the Gutter Runners got to go first. And so 3 Gutter Runners attacked my 3 Wolf Riders, and they killed 2 of them. So there was just the boss left. The boss has 2 attacks, his Wolf's got 1 attack, actually managed to kill 2 of the remaining Gutter Runners. So there was just my boss versus 1 Gutter Runner at the end of round 3. So we do the fight. We say, it sounds like, I will call it there. So, well, let's do this last fight. And he's like, okay, epic challenge moment. Gobbo Wolf Rider boss versus Gutter Runner. The Gutter Runner gets to go first. He hits with 1 attack. He wounds with that attack. I roll my save. And I roll a 5. Now, normally, you'd be dead, right? Because nobody pays for light armor and shields. But the Goblin Shock Cavalry, we pay for our 5-up saves, sir. Light armor and shield kicked in. The Goblin boss survived. He struck back and he took the head of the Gutter Runner. Yes! Absolutely epic moment with the Wolf Riders managing to beat and scatter to the wind 10 to 15 of Clan Eshin's finest. And so we get to the end of game number 3 and the end of the tournament. Sam and I agreed that at the end of that last game, we were just going to call it a draw because it was a grudge match and he could have done all his like hopping around and everything, but he ended up just going and doing it for a bit of fun, just running at us and all that kind of stuff. So we called the last game a draw because it was just a friendly, and we just put the score, and I think it's like 0-0 on the app, and that way we didn't end up getting any extra points that would have screwed over anyone else's placings, because if we've had a favourable pairing there, it might mean I place above someone that I shouldn't do. So we just scored it 0-0, draw for everyone. We got to have a fun game, we got to have some funny moments, and at the same time we didn't screw over anyone else at the tournament. So I ended up going essentially 1 loss, 1 win and 1 draw, and I learned loads and loads of things from that tournament. Firstly, I learned that I absolutely love Orcs and Goblins. I love them. And I am an Empire fanboy at heart. I am. I love my Empire. But there's just something about this faction which has made me fall head over heels in love. I could happily become, and I would love your feedback on this, chat, but I could happily become an Orc and Goblin main. Even if it's just for the next few months, maybe for 2025. Because I've done lots of Empire. My first year in Old World was basically all Empire all of the way. But and people really, really responded to that. But we've kind of covered most of the Empire stuff now, I guess. just doing like full knight army or going like full Nuln army is like the last couple of options that I could do. But I've kind of done the full Nuln army with the, I just did it before we had the Arcane Journal. There's a little bit left to do with Empire, I suppose. And I still want to play the army. But in terms of like what I'm going to be taking to tournaments and what I'm going to be making like content around, I really do feel like I could go full-blown Orcs and Goblins. Maybe we cover a different army each year of Old World, something like that. I don't know. But let me know what you guys think, because I love this. I cannot recommend Orcs and Goblins enough. If you're looking for a great army to get into that can cover hordes, that can cover elite, that can go cavalry, that can go infantry like I did. It just has it all. It's got a really deep roster, and the rules are unbelievably flavorful and thematic. Like winning a game because of exploding squigs, having a bunch of wolf riders just going nuts throughout a tournament. Yeah, it was a ton of fun. The army is so flavorful. And I enjoyed every aspect of it. I enjoyed using goblins. I enjoyed using orcs. I enjoyed using cavalry. I enjoyed using infantry. And I enjoyed using some of the weirder stuff like trolls and like the night goblin squig herds. What I would just say, if I would say what my favorite unit was, I haven't talked about them too much in detail, but I'll sort of highlight it here. The Black Orcs. I was very, very impressed with the Black Orcs. They were the one unit which every single game formed good or better. So in that first game, they marched across an entire board and basically just smashed what they came across. It's just the fact that they got shot to pieces before they got there was a problem. And they wouldn't have got shot to pieces if I'd had shields on half of them. Here's the big thing. I actually kept a track of how many like Black Orcs would have survived in each game if I'd had a 3-up save rather than a 4-up save, for taking advantage of Motley Crue a little bit better. And in the first game, I think it was 7 Black Orcs wouldn't have died. Now, having 7 more Black Orcs when I finally reached those Bretonnian lines would have been huge. Absolutely massive. In the second game, they marched across the board and single-handedly demolished a unit of Empire, Knights, and anything else that got in their way. And the third game, they barely took any casualties, and they swept aside a unit of clan rats, and yet only clan rats, but still they swept aside clan rats with ease. It really felt like the Black Orcs were a dominant force, or a force to be reckoned with, a force that had to be respected in every single game. So I really, really like the Black Orcs. I thought they were a phenomenal unit. Toughness 4 combined with full plate armor, with shield, with Motley Crue, with good discipline, good weapon skill. Yeah, really good. I actually never needed stubborn. I never needed stubborn on them. I don't think it ever came up, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, they were they were a really, really good unit. Units that I was a little disappointed in. I found the big uns to be slightly disappointing. I think the problem is that my instinct is to think of big guns as like on the same level as Black Orcs, and the reality is that at the end of the day, they're just slightly better Orc boys. That's it. That's all it is. They are slightly better Orc boys. So that's all you should really do with them. They will die very easily, and they'll be slightly better in combat, but they're essentially just Orc boys +1. Common Goblins versus Night Goblins. Didn't really feel much from the Fanatics. I found them to be a bit too swingy, but to be fair, I only was using 3. I think Fanatics might be one of those things where you end up, it's either take 0 or take 9, because you take like 3 blobs of like 30 and just unleash Fanatics on people. I think that's a good thing. But I tell you what, Squigs, man, oh my god. Squigs were so good. And I cannot wait to get my 10 Squig Hoppers painted up. I've already got them. I just need to rebase them onto square bases, and then I think Squig Hoppers are going to be one of my favorite units. Common Goblins. I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised by the performance of the Common Goblins. Having that 5-up save didn't make a huge difference. I think it maybe over the course of the entire tournament, it saved 10 more goblins. I don't think it's quite the same as going from a 4-up to a 3-up on Black Orcs. Going from a 6-up to a 5 isn't that meaningful. But the common goblins always performed fine, and the natty skulkers aren't great, but they're only 10 points. It's basically for the same cost as 1 fanatic, you get 3 nasty skulkers. And that was fine. Yeah. I found that my common goblins, on paper, everyone goes on about them being a waste of time, how you should only be taking night goblins. But in my experience, there's very little difference between those units. Because night goblins are more expensive overall because of the fanatics. And they die very easily. Common goblins are a bit cheaper. And at the end of the day, outside of their gimmicks, both are just essentially goblins. So I found those very low. I found in reality the difference between night goblins and common goblins was very low. Wolf Riders, I loved it. I love the Wolf Riders, man. I would happily take more Wolf Riders in my army. I thought Wolf Riders were so fun, so fast. The threat range, and at the end of the day, they're cheap enough where if they screw up, it doesn't matter. But your opponent kind of has to respect them, because if they manage to pull off something crazy, it can turn a game. Like that first game, I almost won that first game because of that common goblin charge. If my right flank hadn't messed up, I think I could have had that game. And that would have come down to the Wolf Riders. Yeah. Just turning that whole flank was massive. Didn't quite work out, but you could see it was my first ever game, so I was making a lot of mistakes, but you could see the potential really shining through. Last couple of bits to mention. I found the level 4 Night Goblin was fine. I actually didn't come across many dragons or anything, so Itchy Nuisance, even though I pretty much went for it every game, rarely came up. I was actually very impressed by the level 2. Level 2 with Hammerhand. If I hadn't bothered giving a ruby ring, he would have come in at about 95 points. 95 points isn't that expensive. Not that expensive. And he was often one of the reasons why the big guns are able to actually do any significant damage. Him just going Hammerhand, and he gets it on a +3 because of the fact that because of the mob rule. So I actually found the level 2 with Hammerhand to be a cheap way of adding a bit more punch to a unit like the big guns. And the Black Orc War Boss was amazing. Yeah, the Black Orc War Boss did everything that I wanted, everything that I hoped for, everything that I dreamed. He did not disappoint. He delivered. Overall, I really enjoyed the army. I am already furiously painting up more Orcs and Goblins. I've got Spider Riders now. I've got more Wolf Riders now. I've got Squig Hoppers. I've got more Goblins. I've got more Night Goblins. And I've also got I've got loads more Orcs. So I'm thinking what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an after action report where I take pure Goblins, and then I'm going to do an after action report after that where I take pure Orcs. So we'll see how the different factions end up doing. And then, if we do end up, like I said, we're going full send on Orcs and Goblins for a year for Old World, maybe we'll do pure Night Goblins and then pure Common Goblins. We can really get into the deep dive of this. We'll see. We'll see. But let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Did you enjoy this after action report? Did you enjoy seeing the Orcs and Goblins? Do you want to see more of them? And are there any other armies out there that you want me to get into? Should I try and make Skaven work? I have got Skaven STLs. I could 3D print a whole Skaven army. Should I try and get Skaven to work? Or an army that I already have that just needs painting up? Bretonnians. I can do full Bretonnian Elementary Crusade. And I've also got a fully finished Beastman army as well. Is it time for some Beastmen? We'll see. We'll see. Let me know what you guys think down in that comment section. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to go and smash the like button. And as always, subscribe to never miss an episode. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian glory hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and Patreons. You guys are amazing. Truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordian Glory full-time without the incredible and generous support of my members. So thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a heartfelt thank you to Alex Dengal, Bon Vert, Lord Pryor, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, Try Again Bragg, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, and August Barney. Seriously guys, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support is incredible and it makes a huge difference. Thank you so much. That's all for now. Hope you've all enjoyed today's video, and of course, as always, see you guys next time.